You've probably felt it yourself. A night when you just want an easy pizza and the box shows up colder than the weather outside, or the toppings look half-hearted, or the delivery timer feels like a joke. It is not your imagination. Across the country, costs are climbing, portions are shrinking, and some chains are cutting corners far faster than diners realize. Reviews keep piling up about late drivers, missing items, dry bases, and prices slipping out of touch with the meal you receive. Even the giants struggle. When a brand runs more than 1,000 branches, one bad store becomes 10, then 20, and suddenly whole regions complain at once. Mid-tier names once trusted for a steady night out now sit near the bottom of British review sites. Smaller chains fall behind too, especially when rapid expansion outruns training and quality checks. So let's talk plainly. 8 chains stand out right now, and not in a good way. If you've wondered why your recent orders feel off, what follows may sound uncomfortably familiar. 1. Domino's Pizza. The first chain feels familiar in every corner of the country, yet its footing has slipped more than many want to admit. Domino's carries a name once tied to fast comfort, but the weight of its own system now drags it into a slow, grinding decline. Flaws begin with the meal itself. A box opens, and a pale stretch of steam rises thinner than it used to be, carrying a faint sweetness from a sauce that no longer has depth. Cheese slides unevenly, clinging to one side as if the ride over had been rougher than expected. The base stiffens within minutes, turning from a warm cushion into something closer to a cardboard sheet. Crust edges darken in patches, while scattered toppings look hesitant, as if placed without confidence or time. Every detail hints at kitchens stretched thin, trying to meet volume rather than flavour. Service struggles follow close behind. A driver reaches the door well past the promised window eyes, apologetic but routine in their apology. Bags feel cool when handed over. Tracking screens jump from almost there to still preparing, leaving customers refreshing their phones with growing irritation. Phone lines ring without answer. Refunds take days. Each moment adds another layer to the sense that the machinery behind the brand is slipping out of sync with the pace of modern dining. Across review sites in the UK, frustration stacks higher each month. Hundreds of recent posts describe missing items, incomplete orders, cold mains and vouchers failing at checkout. Many diners mention delays running over an hour, even on nights without heavy weather or football traffic. Some talk about pizzas arriving with barely any toppings or boxes that look shaken as if they were handled in haste. Others report being charged for dishes that never left the store. Complaints echo from London to Manchester, from coastal towns to suburban strips, forming a pattern the company can't ignore. Accusations also stretch across recent years. Stories circulate about franchises pushing staff to rush pies out the door despite quality issues. Former workers speak about intense pressure during peak hours, limited training, and ovens overloaded far beyond their intended capacity. Reports highlight arguments between franchise owners and the parent company over resource allocation, performance demands, and advertising splits. Each story paints a picture of a business battling its own structure. What hurts most for many long-timers is the contrast with earlier days. Domino's built its UK reputation on speed, consistency, and a certain indulgent joy that made its boxes feel like a treat rather than a gamble. Students counted on it for late-night revision fuel. Families ordered it for Friday evenings when nobody wanted to cook. Young workers relied on it during long shifts when every minute counted. A red and blue logo meant the food would arrive hot, hefty, and satisfying. That memory now stands far from the present. Former loyal customers scroll through feedback threads and recognize their own disappointments in each post. They talk about missing the simple pleasure of a well-timed meal. They speak about a favorite chain that no longer feels dependable. Emotional wear sets in, not in loud outbursts, but quiet resignation, as if watching an old friend drift further away with each misstep. Meanwhile, the global picture mirrors the British one. Markets across Europe and Asia report slowing traffic, rising costs, and shrinking margins. Several regions face stiff competition from smaller craft-focused pizza shops that deliver richer sauces, fresher dough, and steadier heat. Bigger rivals invest heavily in technology loyalty systems and kitchen redesigns, widening the gap. Without a deep overhaul, the brand risks more than a dip in ratings. Its scale may keep it alive, but survival without transformation means being pushed further to the margins by nimble newcomers and regional independents. Domino's will not vanish overnight, yet without bold renewal, the slow squeeze of the modern market will keep tightening slice by slice until the name carries weight without meaning. To Pizza Hut delivery. If Domino's disappoints through inconsistency, Pizza Hut delivery falters with a weightier kind of decline, the sort that settles slowly over years until customers barely recognize what they once relied on. Reports in the UK began tightening around the brand well before 2025. Administrators were called in as several dozen sites faced closure, leaving more than 1,000 staff unsure about their future. Complaints from 2024 through 2025 kept pointing toward the same troubles. Orders left unfinished, deliveries stretching far beyond the promised window, and refunds taking days to resolve. Some diners described meals arriving barely warm, as if the journey had drained whatever heat the kitchen managed to hold. These patterns didn't flare for a week and fade the next. They built over time, steady and unmistakable. Causes sit deeper than late drivers or unsteady ovens. Labour thins out during difficult seasons, and training grows patchy when turnover rises faster than managers can manage. Workers juggle peak hour pressure with scarce support. Owners look for tighter margins to stay afloat after years of financial strain, trimming corners where customers feel it most. Each choice makes sense on paper, yet each one creates another fracture in the experience. That truth sharpens once a slice reaches the hand. A lid lifts, bringing a small rush of air that carries little warmth. Cheese sets unevenly, drawn inward as if the heat fled early. Tomato sauce dries along the crust, leaving a faint tang instead of the rounded flavour the chain once promised. Edges harden into a brittle ring. The centre bends without resilience, letting the toppings drift downward in a tired slump. A bite lands with mixed signals, a whisper of herbs lost behind sweetness, a texture that began strong in the oven, but gave up somewhere between the counter and the street. What should comfort instead feels unfinished, as though the process was cut short at every stage. A meal like that lands harder when history sits behind it. Pizza Hut once held genuine promise in the UK. Its red roofs and patterned booths carried a kind of family warmth. Even its delivery arm had a moment when the standard was simple and reliable hot food, clear timing, portions that felt fair. Generations built memories around those boxes, birthdays, sleepovers, quiet weekends after draining weeks at work. That past doesn't vanish. It lingers, colouring every new disappointment with a shade of something personal. To understand that shift, the narrator turns to a man who spent years ordering from the chain. He stands by his doorway, arms folded, eyes drifting between the pavement and the worn branding on the bag. At first he shakes his head, unwilling to say much. Moments stretch without sound. The decline feels like a subject he has carried too long. Eventually he exhales, shoulders loosening just a little. His voice stays low. Just put it in your story. I don't really have the heart to explain it anymore. No anger sits behind the words, only the softness that comes when disappointment turns familiar. His reaction mirrors thousands across the UK. They aren't outraged, they're worn out. The brand that once stood confidently beside larger competitors now strains under the same pressures that dragged it toward administration. The gap between what it offers and what it delivers keeps widening. 3 Papa John's. What happens when a chain builds its reputation on bold flavour yet hands you a pizza that feels as generic as something lifted from an assembly line. That question grows louder with Papa John's because the first look already hints at how far its character has thinned. The lid opens and nothing stands out. The scent is faint, almost polite. Cheese settles in a uniform sheet without real stretch, as if poured rather than layered. Sauce clings in a narrow band, sharp at first taste, but hollow underneath, carrying the sweetness of a base designed more for consistency than depth. The crust holds a soft rise, yet offers little personality, neither crisp nor chewy, sitting somewhere in the middle, like a safe compromise. Every element feels predictable, the kind of product that could be swapped with another chain's, and nobody would notice. For diners who want something fast and uncomplicated, this isn't a disaster. They bite, shrug, and move on, but anyone who thinks of pizza as more than a quick meal will see the difference immediately. The lack of variation, the muted profile, the careful portioning, each choice hints at a template built to please everyone and satisfy no one fully. It leaves the impression of a chain caught between ambition and caution, producing a result that sits safely in the middle without ever stepping forward. Papa John's still tries to project an image of richness and confidence. Advertisements highlight robust toppings, a signature sauce, and a legacy built on quality. Campaigns frame the brand as a dependable competitor in a crowded market, promising generous layers and bold seasoning. Yet those claims clash with the steady stream of UK reviews describing thin spreads of cheese, uneven baking, and long waits. Complaints from the last 2 years repeatedly mention pizzas arriving with wide gaps between toppings bases that sag from lack of structure and deliveries stretching far past the quoted time. That gap between promise and reality lands harder than the muted taste itself. Customers expect the chain to match the energy of its marketing, especially after years of presenting itself as the fresher, sharper alternative. Instead, the experience often feels like a gentle blow to that expectation, a reminder that branding can move faster than kitchens. The disappointment isn't loud. It sits quietly in the moment when a returning customer realizes the meal in front of them carries less identity than they remembered. Efforts to recover are underway. The company trimmed more than 20 sites in the UK since 2024, hoping a leaner footprint would steady performance. A loyalty overhaul rolled out with the aim of drawing back regulars through clearer rewards. Leadership spoke about improving preparation systems to cut down delays and temperature loss. These steps show intent rather than neglect, and some stores have reported better timing and slightly steadier output. Yet the core question remains whether these adjustments can shift the chain's trajectory or merely soften the symptoms. Real change requires stronger identity, more consistent handling, and a willingness to move away from the safe middle that defines its current product. Signs point to a mixed future. A smaller estate may help quality control, but competition grows fiercer each year, especially from regional shops that balance speed with distinct flavour. Papa John's can climb back if it reshapes both its process and its menu, though the climb will be long and uneven. The next chain shows a different kind of tension, one where history and present stand even further apart. Let's move there. Fort Pizza Express, a chain known for candlelit tables, now struggles to keep a simple takeaway warm long enough to reach a nearby flat. The contrast feels almost absurd, especially for anyone who remembers those early years when Pizza Express meant soft lighting, neat plates, and the quiet thrill of a meal that felt a little more grown-up than the rest of the high street. For diners who once treated it as a small occasion, the shift lands with a faint sting. A woman in Hackney described her ritual back then: a light jacket, a walk past late buses, and a table where the dough still carried that gentle char from the oven. She said every visit felt planned even if it wasn't. Those memories make the present sharper. Her last delivery arrived with the box leaning to one side, cheese drawn away from the crust like the heat had slipped out during the first turn of the bike. The cardboard felt cool enough to doubt whether the kitchen had meant it to leave in that state. Along the edge of this decline sits a chain trying to juggle two identities at once. The dine-in heritage remains familiar. The swirl plates, the basil, hints the calm hum of a crowd that still enjoys the ambience. Yet the delivery arm feels like a distant cousin, recognisable, but thinned out. Reviews across the UK keep circling the same problem meals, losing warmth before they've crossed a single postcode, crusts, losing structure, toppings drawn tight as if rationed with a ruler. Beyond the room where the brand once thrived, numbers reinforce the slide. Trust scores drop into unfriendly territory. Local threads mention orders showing up tepid even on quiet evenings. Riders look rushed, weaving through streets with insulated bags that seem to do half the job. It's not chaos, it's erosion. A slow, calm fading of standards that once made the chain a favourite of students, young couples and families wanting a midweek treat without fuss. Under that pattern sits a simple issue. Pizza Express built its reputation on the controlled environment of a dining room. Once the chain shifted some of that identity into doorsteps and lifts, the old rhythms sputtered. Ovens calibrated for a sit-down pace now feed a system that depends on speed, insulation and timing. Bases baked to land on a plate lose their edge inside a box. Sauces tuned for a warm table don't hold the same charm when they cool. None of this screams failure on its own, yet stacked together they speak clearly. Following the moment you begin to see the impact. Customers still want to believe the name carries weight. They expect the same balance of seasoning, the same friendly neatness that once defined the chain. Instead, they meet a delivery version of something that used to feel curated. What reaches them feels more like an echo-familiar shape, familiar smell, but missing the warmth that gave the brand its tone. Regret settles quietly, not dramatic, just a soft acceptance that the chain hasn't so much fallen as drifted. One former loyal diner summed it up after a short pause on his doorstep. His bag hung from his fingers, the corners of the box already sinking. He didn't sound angry or wounded, just tired. It used to feel like a little treat, he said, eyes on the pavement. Now I'm just not sure what it's trying to be. He didn't add anything more. The sentence was enough. Pizza Express hasn't collapsed. It hasn't even stumbled loudly. It's simply faded at the edges the way familiar things do when they lose the care that once held them together. Cinque Bella Italia. A diner stepped out of a Bella Italia branch, once muttering that the experience felt like watching an English restaurant mishandle fish and chips, a dish so rooted in its own culture that getting it wrong feels almost disrespectful. His frustration wasn't loud. It sat in the way he folded his receipt, as if the paper itself carried the weight of a place that had drifted far from what it promised. The disappointment deepened as more stories surfaced. A location in Plymouth received a 0-rating hygiene report not long ago, a verdict that called for urgent improvement and confirmed what many families had noticed: slipping standards, strange delays, and plates that lack the warmth and care expected from a chain trading so heavily on the idea of Italian comfort. Reviews across the country kept circling the same themes: waiting times that stretched awkwardly, dishes arriving underseasoned or dry, and pizzas that seemed assembled without conviction. Even after the parent group's administration and restructuring, the pattern held on with stubborn persistence. Across that gap lies a harder truth. Italy sits at the centre of pizza's identity, and any brand carrying that lineage toward British tables carries an implied responsibility. People do not expect perfection, they expect a spirit, a sense that the dough, the sauce, the melt of cheese, even in a chain setting, nods toward a heritage built on simplicity and pride. When the chain wanders away from that foundation, the loss feels cultural as much as culinary. Through the years, Bella Italia leaned into that image of homely Italian ease. Posters of sunlit piazzas, menus sprinkled with soft phrases, staff trained to deliver warmth with each plate. Yet the experience inside many branches now feels detached from that imagery. Bases land on the table pale and tired. Toppings scatter without intention. Sauces taste stretched as if diluted to survive a long shift. Families pick at slices that sag in the middle, the strength of the dough spent before the first bite. Every detail hints at a kitchen moving on autopilot, drifting away from the roots that once defined the brand. Along the rim of this decline stands the customer, trying to reconcile memory with what sits in front of them. One father spoke about taking his children there after school, back when the meals carried enough charm to make an ordinary weekday feel a little lifted. He remembered the look on their faces when the pizzas arrived, steam-rising cheese settling slowly, colours bright enough to spark appetite. Years passed and something dimmed. On his most recent visit, the table stayed quiet. The children poked at the crusts, unsure where the flavour had gone. The father didn't complain. He only watched, realising the chain he trusted had slipped into a version of itself he no longer recognised. Within that moment, the visual cue tells the story better than any review. A pizza set down without heat. A fork tapping a crust that gives too easily. A sauce painted thin, leaving bare patches that speak louder than seasoning ever could. The dining room stays bright enough, the branding unchanged, the music soft. Yet the heart of the meal, the one thing that should anchor the whole experience, feels hollow. Bella Italia hasn't collapsed outright, but the distance between what it represents and what it serves grows wider each season. A chain tied to the homeland of pizza should carry a kind of steady, effortless confidence. Instead, it walks with uncertainty, leaving diners with a quiet, lingering discomfort that follows them out the door. 6. Fireaway. Some chains rise quickly on freshness alone, and Fireaway was once one of them, the sort of place friends recommended with a spark in their voice. Its early charm came from speed, colour, and that small thrill of watching a pizza built in front of you. People spoke about it the way they describe a new cafe before it becomes crowded with excitement that feels personal. Those early strengths still echo faintly, but the clarity has gone cloudy. Along those months, the chain's pace outgrew its own control. Shops appeared in clusters across towns that hadn't asked for them, each one promising the same heat, the same toppings, the same dough stretched by hand. The trouble began when that sameness refused to hold. Some branches handled the rush well. Others stumbled the moment the line grew long. A brand built on freshness slipped into a pattern of uneven nights where what you received depended entirely on who stood behind the counter. Across the counter, this gap becomes plain. One evening, a customer might watch dough tossed with care sauce spread with a steady wrist, and toppings placed with a bit of pride. Another evening, the ingredients fly on with haste, leaving edges bare or overloaded. Bases bake unevenly. Crusts arrive stiff or sagging. Cheese settles in a thick patch in one corner, thin in another. The menu looks the same, yet the result feels like two different chains sharing a name. Under the rush lies a fact that shaped much of this slide. Fireaway expanded at a pace many independents never attempt. Dozens of stores opened in a short window, each operating with slightly different hands, different rhythms, and different levels of training. Consistency, the backbone of any growing chain, strained faster than the company could reinforce it. Reviews scattered across the UK began to sound a like burnt edge, raw centre cold by the time it arrived. Toppings missing too much sauce, no sauce at all. None of these complaints alone signals collapse, but together they form a quiet pattern. Toward the thought that ties this together is the visual moment when the box opens. Sometimes the meal looks inviting, colours bright, steam rising. Other times the heat has drifted off during the short walk home. The dough looks tired. The mozzarella pools rather than melts. The toppings slide as if the base never firmed up. You stare at it, recognizing the idea of fresh, fast pizza without feeling the excitement that once came with it. The impact sits in that pause. Fireaway built its reputation on the promise of choice and immediacy. For many customers, those first visits felt hopeful, something quick that didn't taste like compromise. When that hope fades, it doesn't break loudly. It thins. People stop recommending it. They start saying it depends on the branch, which is the gentlest way of admitting a chain has lost its grip. Some still find comfort in it, especially on quiet nights when the staff can take their time. Others feel the uncertainty too strongly to try again. One young couple described their shift in loyalty after months of mixed results. They had treated the place like a reliable Friday stop, something small to look forward to after work. Lately, they open the box with a kind of hesitation, trading glances, as if waiting for confirmation. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they don't say anything at all. Their silence says the most. Fireaway hasn't fallen apart. It just stretched faster than its own foundations. The freshness that once defined it now competes with a network still learning how to keep its identity intact. The chain may find its balance again, but for now it walks a thin line, one step steady, one step unsure. 7 Zizzi. A pair of friends sat under the long stretch of a Manchester evening, the sky dim and low, sharing a bench near the Arndale. They opened their Zizzi takeaway, expecting a hint of what they once knew from dining in a little warmth, rising a touch of basil in the air, that gentle comfort the restaurant used to offer. What greeted them was subdued a pizza that looked tidy enough but lacked the presence they remembered. Nothing was wrong outright, yet nothing felt alive either. That small hesitation in their faces said more than any complaint. Through that moment, the contrast between restaurant and takeaway becomes unmistakable. Inside Zizzi, the experience used to carry a mild charm, steady lighting the soft clatter of cutlery staff, placing plates with calm precision. The pizzas didn't try to be dramatic, they simply struck a balance, warm, lightly seasoned, and satisfying in a quiet, dependable way. But once the meal leaves that room, something falters. Without the heat from the oven and the structure of a fresh plate, the pizza often arrives gentler than intended. The edges lose their firmness, the seasoning seems softer, and the flavour that once lingered now fades too quickly. British diners hold a simple expectation: what tastes good at the table should still taste good 10 minutes later. Zizzi doesn't always manage that bridge. Beyond that difference lies a story shaped by the recent years. After the pandemic, the chain trimmed its processes to stay steady, fewer toppings, simplified menus, quicker preparation. None of these decisions were surprising, but paired with the steady price increases starting from 2023, customers began to feel that too much had been shaved off. The meals no longer held the small touches that once made them feel worth the evening. Dishes seemed quieter, flatter, more careful than confident. Under these adjustments, reviews across the country started sounding alike. People mentioned pizzas cooling too fast, or slices arriving with sparse layers where they expected more. Others said the flavours felt muted compared to what they remembered from years back. None of it caused outrage. The reactions were gentler, shaped by memories rather than anger. Diners missed the character, even if they couldn't quite name what had gone missing. A shopper who had been loyal to the chain described the shift with a weary fondness. He used to drop in after work, choosing Zizzi for its easy comfort rather than any bold claim. He remembered taking slow bites while the room hummed around him, never in a rush. Recently, he ordered the same meal to eat at home, hoping the feeling might follow. When he opened the box, a small silence hung between him and the meal. The crust no longer held its lift. The topping lay thin. The seasoning came through faintly. He ate it anyway, more out of habit than pleasure, as though he was trying to keep hold of something already slipping away. Across moments like these, a pattern takes shape. The takeaway version is neat but subdued familiar, yet missing the warmth that gave the dine-in experience its charm. The colours remain the same, but the life behind them feels dimmer. The aroma that once signalled a comforting meal now barely rises. It's not bad, It's just not what people associate with the Zizzi they knew across the table. The result settles softly rather than sharply. Zizzi still offers pleasant evenings for those who dine inside, and on quiet nights the kitchen can deliver something close to what people remember. But the takeaway tells another story, one where a chain known for gentle restaurant comfort struggles to carry that comfort into a cardboard box. Nothing here feels like a fall. It feels like softening the kind that stays with you after the last slice, leaving a faint sense that something once familiar has become a little harder to hold on to. 8 Ask Italian. More than half of recent low-rated reviews across UK branches point to the same pattern: slow-pacing cooling plates and pizzas built with an economy of effort that feels engineered rather than cooked. The numbers aren't dramatic on their own, but read together they outline a rhythm that has settled into Ask Italian over the last few years, a rhythm shaped less by flavour and more by the pressure to keep the lights on. Across that pattern, the immediate issues are plain. Busy evenings stretch the staff thin. Orders bunch up. The heat slips away between oven and table. Toppings land sparingly, as though each ladle and handful must be weighed against a rising cost curve. The chain hasn't collapsed, but it has tightened itself into a shape that leaves little room for personality. Meals arrive in a way that feels correct on paper, but muted in practice. Customers expect at least a steady warmth, a confident layer of sauce, a portion that fills the plate without looking defensive. Instead, the output often sits on the quieter side of everything, warm enough, seasoned enough, topped enough, but rarely more than that. Through these operations lies the core challenge: staffing shortages that never truly eased after 2023. Multiple branches still run lean, relying on fewer hands to maintain a service model built for fuller teams. Evenings that once ran smoothly now hinge on whether the kitchen has enough people to keep momentum. Simplified menus were introduced to manage the load, and they helped steady the pace, but they also trimmed the chain's identity. With fewer dishes and narrower preparation windows, the food becomes easier to reproduce and also easier to forget. Within this wider trend sits a reflection that extends beyond the UK and beyond Ask Italian itself. Across the world, food chains that claim a cultural lineage often drift into a model driven by optics and profit rather than genuine craft. They adopt the symbols, the soft typography, the sun-kissed imagery, the promise of authentic comfort, but their kitchens operate on a spreadsheet logic. Efficiency becomes the ingredient no one names aloud. Toppings get measured. Recipes get adjusted for cost. Staff learn systems rather than cooking. The result is not a scandal, not even a failure. It is a dilution, slow and steady, that shifts familiar dishes into polished approximations. At Ask Italian, that trend takes a specific form. The pizza that arrives looks organized and presentable, the edges neat, the center balanced. But the heat often fades before the meal reaches the table. The cheese settles quickly. The base shows little of the character that once marked a restaurant with ambition. Seasoning feels cautious, as though designed to avoid missteps rather than create moments. It is food that behaves properly, yet rarely carries a spark. The chain isn't alone in this. Many mid-market brands now serve meals calibrated to survive busy hours rather than live up to the images on their menus. At the end of the chain sits the larger impact. Diners aren't angry, they are simply unconvinced. They taste something adequate but not memorable, steady but not distinct. The disappointment is mild, almost polite, shaped by a recognition that the meal reflects the system more than the cook. Ask Italian participates in a global shift where restaurants that once traded on identity now trade on optimization. When customers leave the branch or close the box at home, they aren't left with questions about flavour. They're left with a quieter thought. How many places now serve food that feels finished in process but unfinished in spirit? In the end, this list isn't about turning you away from pizza. It's the opposite. Good pizza still lives all across the UK in small shops that care about heat and balance, in chains that haven't lost their way, and in kitchens where the dough still rises with purpose. What the weaker brands remind us is that we as customers shape the standards more than we realise. When we accept almost, we get more of it. When we demand better through our money, our choices and our silence, when something disappoints the market, adjusts. So keep the faith. Trust the places that earn your appetite, not the ones that assume it. Look for warmth that lasts past the first bite, toppings placed with intention, and a crust that holds its own weight. Pizza still has heart in this country. We just have to choose like it matters.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.